All right. So we have a couple days to talk football before we get, break between basketball games here. Let's talk about recruiting. Who's going to be on the team next year? You ready?
Yep.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater can stop by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way you get the podcast in your news feed each day. We are quickly approaching 300 subscribers on YouTube, so welcome back to the YouTube channel. And again, when we get to 500, doing a giveaway every 250 or so, we get to 500, we'll figure out something else. A t-shirt to give away. The t-shirt, the Marcus Ash t-shirt 250 went over pretty well. Today, we're going to talk about recruiting. We got segments on high school kids, segments on transfer kids. And as I told Rob in pre-production, I was reading a lot of Rob Seller's work on 247.com, doing some research, 247sports.com, and asked if he'd come on and talk to us some about it. And so we have Rob Sellers of 247 on here to talk. Rob, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well, man. How about yourself?
I'm all right. Yesterday's episode was talking about revisiting some losses in the football season. And I got to be honest, Rob, reliving some of those to talk about how, the Tulane one ended up not looking so bad by season's end, but the Tulsa one did. And so I'm glad that we can talk about who else can be on the roster next year to hopefully have a lot less of those, even with a more difficult schedule. Rob, before we get into the nitty-gritty on this, you have been doing recruiting stuff for a while now. What's the background there? What's your story with 247?
Well, I started out covering really just some high school stuff locally, way back when I just kind of wanted to get involved. Really wanted to begin by getting involved in sports photography. It was kind of my first thing. But that quickly became one of those deals where it's a lot of fun to do, but definitely not like this is a whole lot better, but it's definitely not profitable. So I was working with a high school site on the Scout Network here, which was no longer around, and just told them, hey, look, maybe I think I could do the writing thing. Obviously, I read constantly. I was one of those, sports nerds growing up and whatnot. So just started doing a little bit of writing. Had a mentor, so to speak, in Brian Peroni, who also is from the area, covers A&M for 247. And he kind of showed me the ropes and taught me a few things along the way. And then because of my familiarity with the Houston area, when Rivals was looking for a new publisher for their website, shortly after Kevin Sumlin arrived, my name came up in the discussion, and that was kind of my first big gig, so to speak, being the publisher over there. Did that for about 6 years or so, I believe, and then I made a jump over to Scout at the time, which was quickly purchased up by 247, which is kind of where we've landed now. So kind of touch them all, so to speak, and other than the new one that's popped up, I've kind of worked for everybody along the way, but it's always been the Cougars. Had a short stint in there a little while where I also covered Texas A&M for a while and kind of did both. But now I'm back solely again doing Houston, and I enjoy it. Really have really learned to enjoy it, and the relationships and stuff that I've built along the last 15 seasons or whatever I've been here has been amazing.
Well, and Rob, you mentioned you're a veteran that you've been doing this a long time with a couple different outlets. And correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to get into some more about the specific kids. Looks like to me, as far as high school kids coming in, Houston, it looks like it currently has 15 signees. Obviously, we have a window here until the next big signing day. I imagine that they have a low composite ranking because 15 isn't a whole lot for this point in the year. And so you see some other schools, especially in the Big 12 next year, that have a much, I think Houston's 61st in the country in composite ranking, and it's other Big 12 schools being in the top 10. And it's like, why are we falling so far behind? Am I right in saying that I think the kids we have are all fairly well touted? There's just not many of them yet.
Yeah, it's really a numbers game. The way 247 set up, it's kind of built to be, and it's not fun along the way, and we all track it as we go, so to speak, but it's built to be a final number type thing. It's built off how many commits you have in the class. Each one's worth a certain amount of points. So when you have 15 commits, that's 15, point sources, so to speak. And, you're going up against other teams that maybe have 20 commits, and that's 20, even if, even if they have, better recruits or non-better recruits, less recruits, it doesn't matter because the numbers are going to come out ahead either way because they have so many more. But there's another kind of listing when you go to the commitment page in those. It says average. It's average per recruit, which is average star recruit. And when you go to that, it kind of evens out a little bit better. That kind of gives you along the way because, of course, that only averages what's there. So it evens itself out. And even in the end is where you want to really be able to tell and hang your hat on what the total is going to be. Finally, in the last couple of years, they've adjusted as quickly as they can, along with the adjustments that the NCAA has been making with the transfer portal and including those rankings also. Because Houston, obviously, a couple of years ago, they ate up like 6, 7, 8, 10 scholarships on transfers shortly after Holgorsen arrived, and they weren't really counting transfers in there. So it made the recruiting class look small, and of course the point total was extremely small. So it was kind of a little bit, and quickly, obviously, things have changed so fast, but they had to start adjusting, and they're still in the process of adjusting each year, just like it seems like we are.
Definitely. In looking at those, guys that are bringing up that average star rating, two standout 4-star kids from the Houston area, wide receiver Jonah Wilson and running back Parker Jenkins. Outside of me being particularly fond of Parker's first name, there's some special guys in that pair. You lose Tank Dell, you bring in Jonah Wilson. I think that's a fairly natural fit. What can you tell us about Jonah or Parker, or bringing in a combination of skill guys like that?
Yeah, no, definitely. Those two are the crown jewels, so to speak, at the moment for the class. I think there's probably some more coming that are going to be up there at the top. But for as far as who they've signed, Jonah Wilson is a big one for them. Not only keeping a big, impressive receiver from a local area home, but also the fact that they were able to, take a kid from Texas that legitimately Texas wanted. We're here in the Big 12 now, so to speak, at the moment. I know a lot of Houston fans love it when they get a chance to one-up Texas at times, and that's great. They've taken a liking to getting to see Houston on some of the wins and get a little bit more involved in recruiting along the way. But Jonah is a very big talent. I mean, he's got the size and speed for everybody that, you brought up TCU earlier. I know that's something a lot of people are talking about with recent, with what's going on in the game coming up next week. You look at their receivers, they've got big, strong, fast, physical wide receivers. And that's what Jonah Wilson is. He's the type of receiver that you see them dominating with. So Houston's going to not go solely with the big guys. They'll also make some smaller guys in, like Jacoby Banks is another one they just signed. He's a mid-year guy, just like Jonah Wilson is. So those two not only – I take that back. Jonah's not, but Jacoby is. But a number of the signees are going to be there at the midterm, which means they'll get to go through spring. Extra spring is always good for these young guys trying to get their feet wet. And as they sign a better quality guy and they look to try to get them in there and potentially sign guys that can contribute earlier, they're going to need to have those guys potentially that can come in early and be familiar with the offense before fall comes around.
I noticed you mentioned Jacoby is from Missouri City. If I count Missouri City as a greater Houston area, I guess. I mean, that's not. But
yeah, of course.
The 4 of the top 5 recruits are not just from or the top 5 scored recruits are not just from Texas, but are from the Houston area. That's kind of been the thing that we've hoped Holgorsen would do more of, right? As fans, I should say because there's such a bedrock of talent in Houston. If you just keep it, you've got a chance, right? Do you see that as kind of a trend in his overall recruiting arc? We're 4 years into the experiment now, or is that just kind of happenstance with those 4?
No, I really do. I think that's they're obviously, as they can get better traction with those higher rated local recruits, I think anytime they would obviously love and have that unique opportunity to sell the ability to stay home. That's obviously popular with a lot of the kids that do stay home. And even going back to the last year, with Matthew Golden, that was a big win for them in the last class. They were able to keep home, and you saw that he made a pretty immediate impact. So as they can start keeping some of these local kids that are standouts that are at that level, I think they'll get quick traction with skill guys just like Matthew Golden, Jonah Wilson, Parker, like we mentioned before, Jacoby Banks. I mean, skill guys have always, they've always been able to steal some pretty good ones, maybe some that are undervalued because of size or this and that. But traditionally, they've been good at getting some receivers and stuff like that, skill guys in. But where we'll really, truly start to see the benefits, in my opinion, is when they're able to start keeping offensive linemen, specifically tackles, home. Obviously, Demetrius Hunter in the last class, he probably is good to be considered local since he's just from over in West Orange. So that's a bit of a spread for local, but Southeast Texas, so to speak. So I think you've seen them go ahead and take as many local big names as they can first before they look elsewhere. And I think that's going to be a continued trend. As many as they can keep home, they would prefer to do that first.
You mentioned they got a ton of skill guys in this early signing day part of the year. They have 2 defensive linemen and 1 offensive lineman. Now, I think it sounds like you as well. I'm going to recruit a tackle, and if they turn into a guard, they turn into a guard. I want tackles and figure it out after that. But they only got 1 right now. We may get more in the next few days, but they got 1 right now. Is that because we're hoping for more down the road, or they just feel that comfortable with the transfer portal and the guys they got in?
It's definitely transfer portal. They made a point somewhere along the way. They're still tacking on. I think they're technically still. This has been a conversation on the board the last few days, but Caden Jones is a guy from Louisiana that they've been after. They're in their final 3. He's supposed to decide next Saturday at the Army All-American game. He's down to Florida, Texas A&M, and Houston. And so those are the 3. He's a quality tackle. These are the type of guys, like I said, you could tell they really start getting some better traction when they land guys like this. You can steal them away from 2 SEC programs that obviously put guys in the league pretty regularly. So, but he spoke openly, and he said that, it's Houston's depth chart right now, and the ability to come in and see early playing time. As soon as they feel I'm ready, they need me over there, so they're going to put me in there. That's for now. That's a value they're going to have to sell. Obviously they're hurting for tackles. But I think at some point they decided, look, we've offered who we're going to offer. We don't want to offer anyone further down our list. We don't want to reach anywhere. We've reached some along the way because we had to recruit the American Conference, but now we have to recruit the Big 12. So at some point they said, look, that's it on the high school or the project, so to speak, guys that you're probably going to need a year or 2. And they decided, we're going to have better traction. There's going to be a ton of guys available in the transfer portal. So that's going to be how we're going to have to go in the short term to get guys on the field quicker. They would just soon take somebody that's a second-year college player that's that much further along physically, mentally, more settled into the college lifestyle and whatnot, and they can see the field quicker, which is what they're going to have to see. Patrick Paul coming back is huge for them next year, but I believe next year obviously is going to be his last year, so they need to start preparing who's going to be next, and they need to potentially upgrade on the right side as well, heading into the Big 12, just at the tackle spots.
You mentioned the transfer portal being so big for Houston's offensive line. And before we segue into that, because I do want to talk for a full segment on the transfer portal guys, let's talk a little bit about BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number 1 source for sports betting info, stats, news, analysis. You get the latest odds for professional, amateur leagues, pro football, college football, bowl season, basketball. I guess they even have preseason baseball odds up. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline.net as well. It's the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. You can hit the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. It's where the game starts. Now, they've got the line for the college football national championship game set at 13.5. They're taking Georgia by 13.5. I'm not sure if the Horned Frogs can win the whole thing. I've watched enough college football to know that I think they can keep it closer than that. Rob, you're not. Yeah, I think we can take the points there, right? Like, they can at least keep it closer.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they should be able to hang with them. And in the end, can they, like you said, can they win it? A lot of people didn't think they could win last week, so that's a good point.
Anyway, so we're saying go to betonline.net. I'm not going to spend your money for you, but I think that's a big line. I think TCU can take that one down. So go to betonline.net today. It's where the game starts. All right, Rob, you brought up the transfer portal in talking about what Houston's looking at with their offensive line. They currently have 4 transfers signed for next season. I guess I say next season because technically Jalen Garth was earlier, right? He just had to sit out a little bit of time.
He came in August, right? But he'll count towards this class.
But I want to start with Garth because he transferred from Texas. He kind of fits that tackle, but may play something else kind of mold. He's 6'5", 285. Is that a tall guard or a really big center? I don't know. We haven't seen him play. So what can you tell us about Jalen Garth?
I know obviously he was loved coming out of high school. A lot of teams are after him. Had the whole full big offer list, 4-star guy. Went to Texas, and I don't know, I never did get the scoop or hear anything on what changed his mind about Texas, but I know Houston was glad to have him. Like you mentioned, 6'5", he's kind of like I'm trying to think of someone you can relate him to. In a way, Dennis Bardwell. He played inside, he played outside. He held his own at time at tackle. I think he's probably more comfortable at guard, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if he's still up in Canada or not, but I think he moved in at guard up there. but he held his own when they needed to tackle that year, in the year and a half, so to speak. So I think he's kind of like that. We're going to see how it goes. I think they were going to throw him in there and see what he looks like. Like you said, if he ends up being a dominant inside guard type guy, an absolute, road paver in there, then so be that as well. In my opinion, what I've shared so far is a lot of people are excited that they've got all 5 guys coming back next year on the offensive line, which is good. Don't get me wrong. They've needed the continuity. I mentioned before, Paul coming back is a big thing for them. Just his experience is unbelievable at this point, the amount of starts he's had. But they could go out and, in my opinion, if they could find an upgrade, even someone that's better left tackle than Paul, they should go get him, because they need better offensive linemen moving forward. And if they can get them this year and somebody comes in and beats somebody out legitimately for a job, in a way, that's kind of the world they're living in now with the transfer portal and the fact that they have to upgrade so quickly to compete in the Big 12. That's where you're going to see your difference first next year, is in the trenches. You're going to see the difference in size. And that's one thing. Luckily, like I said before, with the recruit from Louisiana, they've got favorable depth charts that they can sell these transfer portal guys. They've had, I don't want to get ahead of you there, but they've had a few tackles already that have come in and visited, and I know they're hoping to land one for sure, a transfer out of Alabama. So they've got things that they can sell to these guys. They've just got to go out there and close a deal and get it done.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioned that they bring back all 5 stars in the offensive line. It's also worth pointing out that Clayton Tune kept a pretty clean jersey last year in the American Conference, and I think the big thing is that you need to have the same success in the Big 12 Conference, and you're playing a much better set of defensive linemen every week, front sevens, I should say, because it's not just those guys. Obviously, you got to play TCU. TCU's a national championship game, right? If Jalen Garth is the oldest or the farthest back transferring, as in he's the furthest removed from his actual signing. The most recent, I guess, as the recording of this, because we're publishing in the morning, so I guess someone else might be overnight. But Adari Halsey, talk to me about the safety, because I love bringing in defensive back help. I think that was a weakness as far as a year ago without poo-pooing too many kids. I think it's nice to have him coming in. But it wasn't a name that was particularly on my radar. So what can you tell us about him?
It's amazing. It's kind of a testament to these guys that get overlooked a lot of times in high school. And you wonder sometimes how you see players that make it big in the NFL and they show their profile from way back when. Rivals had me a 2-star and all that. And that's great that they use that for motivation. Absolutely. Adari Halsey was very productive in high school at Fort Bend. Marshall, another Fort Bend guy you were talking about before. Very productive only a year ago. He's only a freshman this year at New Mexico. But played corner, but he obviously wasn't going to play corner at the college level. So, they were assuming, how's he going to transition type thing. Well, evidently he transitioned just fine, because he got to New Mexico, and obviously it's New Mexico, and their conference is probably a little bit different than what they're expected to step into in the Big 12. But it's still college football. They play non-conference schedule. He had 24 tackles against Fresno State. I know I mentioned that whenever he committed. I mean, that's just a crazy amount by itself. And he led, I think, 87 on the year, so to speak. Something in there, 87 was where he was at. But just tremendous output. He proved to be one of those thumpers, really good run support safety, which I know Houston fans after last year's step back on defense are looking for any upgrades, just like the staff would be. Anybody they can upgrade and be more sound, more instinctual back there, they'll take them. And it's nothing personal if you get passed over on the depth chart. They've just got to build depth and increase the talent level. But Halsey's going to be a guy that can come in and compete right away. Potentially, maybe they put him on the other side of Hippolyte next year just to see how it plays out. I mean, I think you could see him play in a number of spots. I'll be interested to see just how quick he still is. I mean, he's listed 5'11", 220 for New Mexico. That's obviously a little thicker than your average corner, but I'd be interested to see with his ability in the run game, maybe if he might fit in at their nickel spot, depending on how well he can cover. Those nickels need to be able to cover still some. But with his run support, depending on, the packages you can get on the field, if there's a way to get, your 2 best safeties and have Halsey out there where you basically have 3 safeties in certain situations, then that's great. It'd be interesting to see in the spring how they use him, where they start him out at, and where he progresses at.
Yeah, and versatility. I mentioned in my note to myself, the 12-2 team had 2 pro corners in Marcus Jones and Demarion Williams, and you're not going to replace that. And obviously, a year removed, we saw how much we missed that. The safeties had to get out of the box a lot last year to help out. That meant the run game was weaker. You hope if Adari Halsey could play that nickel type corner, He's in the box, but he's still cut. Like I think that's a great spot. That's a good call there. I don't mean to skip over Jack Martin as a punter. I always pray that the punters don't have to play much. So we're gonna hope that's the way that goes. The biggest name, right? If Halsey's the most recent and Garth is the farthest removed, the biggest name is Donovan Smith because he's the quarterback, and we need a new starting quarterback. I'm not sure it's necessarily his job right away. I think there will be some competition, but I'm interested to hear, what did you hear about Donovan Smith coming in from Tech? We got to see him up close and personal in, I guess that was early September. But what are you hearing? Is he the starter? Is he competing? Does it change the offense? What's on your radar with Donovan?
I don't think he walks in as a starter, but I think it was an absolute need for them to add. Obviously, they need quarterback depth with what they've lost in the transfer portal before, and then the guys they've lost this offseason. So they were going to have to add guys either way. But being able to go out and get a guy like Donovan Smith, who's played in the Big 12, he's been young, he's made some young mistakes. I think he's far from reaching his ceiling, but he does have that experience. He's seen the Big 12 speed. He's been successful at times, and he's struggled and grown some along the way as well. Perfect fit, in my opinion, because you're going to put him in there and he's going to go up against Lucas Coley, who's had a year in the system now. By the time Donovan gets there, they get there in the spring. That's good for Lucas. I think it's great, like you mentioned earlier, the fact that Clayton Tune was able to be as mobile as he was. He's not necessarily a tremendous dual threat quarterback, but by far there's no statue back there whatsoever. He can definitely prove he can hurt teams with his legs, but having the choices basically down to Donovan Smith and Lucas Coley, however they battle it out and end up in next fall, both those guys are going to be mobile. So, at least if there are some growing pains on the offensive line as a transition, it's good to have those mobile guys back there. Maybe they can create a little bit like Greg Ward used to do back when, when he was on campus. He was obviously known for stuff like that.
One, I loved the mobile quarterbacks and the Greg Ward stuff. Man, those are fun. Not that Clayton Tune wasn't fun. I thought they should run a little bit more, honestly. Before we get on to a bunch of guys that could sign in the next few days and weeks, Dana Holgorsen mentioned that he wants even more competition in his quarterback room. So I guess kind of as a segue, is there more? I mean, I know there's a kid at Austin, Lake Travis, and Lake Travis has had a number of obviously high-end quarterbacks come out of Austin. Baker Mayfield, I guess, comes to mind as the most notable. But is there potential to add another QB to the room, or is it kind of set at Coley versus Smith?
He acts like he wants to add another quarterback, and I don't think he means the signee McMichael that just signed. Obviously, that's a high school guy coming in. That's not someone they would expect to come in and compete for time right away. He says he wants to, but you've seen probably just like all of us have what's probably going to be the difficulties. Like, you're trying to sell to a quarterback to come in a room with two guys that already you got one guy, like I said, that's been in the offense already for a year. He's at least going to know what he's doing. You got Donovan Smith coming in that's obviously, got some experience in the Big 12. So he's kind of at least even that playing field. And then you want to bring another guy in, which you can honestly tell him he can come in and compete, but just as soon as you do and he loses, he's going to turn around and hit someone's going to hit the transfer portal, and then you're back in the same situation. So I absolutely think they would love to bring in a third quarterback. And if they do, I think it'd be good for the depth and competition. Can they find a guy that is looking for a new home, but isn't necessarily looking for a guaranteed starting spot or just wants a fair shot, so to speak, and someone that, you're going to run out of quality bodies at some point, and then, you might as well just wait and hold off and see how it plays out for the season and, hope for the best in terms of injuries.
Well, and you point out it's a hard sell. You got a kid that knows the offense and a kid that knows the defenses you're going to see, right? As far as seeing the Big 12, like that's a really hard sell. We'll see if another quarterback comes in, but I want to talk to you for a second about the rest of the guys that could be coming in. So when you look at the rest of the guys that could be coming in first, we mentioned off top that there haven't been a whole lot of linemen signed. Admittedly, there's not a starting spot open necessarily. There's competition if you want it. And I think the big men are really important. And so I want to come back to that. But before we come back to that, there's one, I guess he's listed as 6 foot 190, but Mikal Harrison-Pilot is a highly touted recruit that still has Houston on his radar. And I believe I saw correctly, he's picking pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
And so I want to ask you, how serious is Houston in the running for here? Because I think it's fairly high on listings. And then B, what kind of an impact can that kind of athlete, I don't know what position to call him. He does everything for Temple High School.
Yeah.
What kind of an impact can that athlete have in the Houston system?
He's obviously the biggest name in terms of rankings and whatnot that's left on the board that they're still chasing. He's picking next Saturday at the Army All-American game in San Antonio. They had the first one today, this afternoon, the Under Armour game. I know this won't publish till tomorrow, but so they had the first game Tuesday, and then of the two big high school games, and then Saturday is the Army game. I haven't heard yet when he's picking in the game, but he's down to basically Houston and TCU. I know there's some other schools that'll be listed in that mix. Texas is still in the mix. He took an official there. Cal was really involved for a while, but I mean, you look at his offer list, it's just everybody. So obviously, Houston, one of the biggest things they have going for them is his dad. He is the legacy. His dad played for the Cougars and actually wrapped up, oddly enough, as long as I've been around, getting a little long in the tooth. His dad finished in 2008, and I started covering Houston in 2009, so I missed him by a year. We've chatted a little bit, though, because we obviously have some of the same just people that we know from along the path. But his dad's a coach at Temple. He played here, and he's been coming to Houston games since he was a kid. And he's talked openly about as many games as he's been to. He did the official visit late in the process. If I'm not mistaken, he was the last official visit. Houston was the last one that he took. So he had said all along he was going to put it off and wasn't going to commit till February. Texas supposedly, just per the interwebs, that was something that turned him off. They were looking to get people locked in early. They kept recruiting him, but they were looking for somebody earlier rather than later. And so, like I said, it seems like it's down to Houston and TCU. I personally, for what we do, I have a crystal ball in for him that I was just laughing about today. I put it in a year ago because I really thought they had a shot. It's been up and down. I've changed the confidence level, up, down, this, that. But with him picking Saturday, I really do. I think Houston, to me, I think they've got him locked in. I think he's going to pick Houston. It'll be the biggest, one of the top recruits they've ever landed, obviously up there with Ed Oliver's company. And I think it'll be a huge get for them. I went and saw him play a couple times this year because obviously wanted to follow his recruitment and also kind of get a feel for what kind of a player he is. He plays wide receiver for them, plays safety for them. I saw him line up at corner in games, returns punts for them. Like you've said, he does everything for Temple. He's the best player on the field for them. But in the college game, he wants to come in as a wide receiver. He's made that clear. That's what he wants to start at. A lot of people debated, and I think some of those offers even came at safety. So adding another just extremely talented athlete. I shared recently, I think he's the athlete, the skill set to be able to contribute right away. But I would like to see how comfortable he gets and how quickly he gets comfortable with the nuances of the wide receiver game. Can you block when the ball's not coming your way type thing? All the little things that transitions to the college level where you got to be better at all the – basically other than being a wide receiver, you got to do all that other stuff. So we'll see how quickly he could be a guy that you start seeing on the field immediately.
Well, and obviously we're all rooting for the kid coming home story, right? His dad played here, like you said, and he's also very good, so that helps. Do you have a name? I mean, I could go to I mentioned the Lake Travis quarterback. I should mention his name is Bo Edmondson now that I have that pulled up. Do you have, and as I'm scrolling through here, there's a bunch of 3-star kids that have Houston high on their radar, or are still like looking at U of H in the process. A lot of stuff gets decided in the next 3 weeks, right?
Yep.
Is there any name that Cougar fans need to kind of keep their eye on? Not that you have inside information necessarily, but just hey, this could really help, and he is looking at the U of H very seriously.
No, I'll be open. There's a few names I'll throw out to you from North Shore. These are guys like we mentioned before. North Shore is North Shore. Everybody knows who they are, what they've done. And obviously Houston would love to have a pipeline tapped in over there and keep that talent home. So I mentioned before they've had tackles come and visit. The guy from Alabama, Damian George, is a North Shore product, signed with Alabama. He's been over there a couple of years, and he's in the transfer portal looking for a new home. And obviously Houston, that would be a guy that you could almost potentially plug and play on the right tackle spot immediately. That's what he's been playing over there. Obviously you got to come and prove yourself. I don't think you're going to hand anybody anything, but his skill set and his size alone give him a decided advantage over some of the guys that are on the roster already. So he's one. And then there's a couple of high schoolers that still from North Shore that haven't decided, and Jacoby Banks and Jalen Anderson. Both those guys are defensive backs. Jacoby Davis. Sorry, I don't know if I just said Banks. I think I did, but Jacoby Davis. Yeah. Jacoby Davis is the cornerback from North Shore. A lot of offers. I put a crystal ball in for them both a while back, and I've had my decisions and I'm wanting to keep it there or not. I've heard real good things about Jacoby Davis and his interest as of late, and it seemed along the way like they were kind of a pair to me. I've not had as good communication with Anderson, the safety that's over there. I think Houston would love to keep both of them home. They both have, really nice offer lists, other schools that were pursuing them. And again, it would help bolster that North Shore pipeline, so to speak, and get them in the door with Coach John Kay over there and getting some of that talent to stay home. So those are 3 North Shore names that are on my radar right now that in terms of, like you mentioned, the next 3 weeks are going to be pretty critical. So those 3 guys are ones that I'm watching. And then, of course, there's new offers, it seems like, still going out to transfer portal guys, and there's still guys that are hitting the portal. So it's one of those, just keep watching, so to speak, keep track, and it's going to play out pretty frantically over the next 3 weeks. There'll be all kinds of visitors coming in, and they'll look to wrap up. Anybody that's coming in midterm has to be in classes starting the 17th, and obviously there's a little bit of a grace period after that where you can still get in, but pretty much by the next 3 weeks or so, that people are going to have decisions and get where they're going to get.
I don't know how to squeeze this kid in, but I enjoyed watching his high school tape because he's much larger than everyone on the field. He's not from Texas, so it's not quite the connection. Jamal Franklin from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, is listed at 6'6.5", 370 pounds. He's listed as a tackle, but some of the times he moves, he might be more of a down blocking guard. I don't know. He's a giant. He's a high school kid, but he's a giant. He's only rated as a 3-star kid. I think he probably needs to shape his body a little bit differently in his time in college. Probably take a few years of that. Is Houston really looking at a guy that, just having a guy that big on the offensive line room, I think would be kind of, it would make you look more like the Big 12 offensive line groups, right? For as cheap as that may feel, is that a realistic possibility? He's from Louisiana. He's looking out east. What are you hearing out of there?
Yeah, he was committed to Houston for a while there. They have been recruiting him along the way. I don't know if he was one of those guys where they had to make a decision on long-term, what they were looking for when I was talking before about long-term projects versus guys that could contribute sooner. And I think that's potentially what happened with him. I don't know where he's going to end up at, but in the world that we live in 2023 now, I almost said 22, but in the world we live in now with the transfer portal, he's the guy you want to keep eye on because he had a great relationship with the staff going back to when one of the assistant offensive line coaches was at Texas, and this was like some of his early recruiting process. So he had a great relationship with him. His problem is he got injured. He had a back injury his junior year, missed his junior year. Just as he was kind of exploding onto the scene, he had won a camp MVP at one of these, I think it was a Rivals camp. And so he was just starting to get some traction. He had a pretty bad back injury and had to miss the rest of his junior year and had surgery. And so he worked his way back, but physical conditioning obviously became an issue with having that rehab and not being able to do as much as he'd probably like to over that extended period. So he's been working his way back. Like I said, I think he's going to see him sign at a smaller school, but with the relationship thing these days, I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up back in the portal down the road if Houston takes another strong look at him then if he's more prepared.
Well, and frankly, just again, people that big they aren't very common. And so can you find, if he treats some other smaller program like a JUCO almost, I'd be totally okay with bringing him back in a couple of years.
Yeah.
I was just intrigued by a guy that size looking in the U of H. You don't see that very often.
Yeah, true.
I think I know the answer is because we've mentioned that they need some offensive linemen and defensive line help to move into a Big 12 conference. And then the DBs were a hole last year, right? Are there any positions I'm missing of as far as looking at what Houston needs to do in the next 3 or 4 weeks?
As far as transfer guys in the portal, you're going to want to see them close. I think they're probably good at wide receiver. I know another local kid just hit the portal today from Oklahoma State, John Paul Richardson. It's a guy they offered when he was coming out of high school. He's very productive, and it might be another answer at that slot position. He's one of those smaller slot guys. But I just don't know. You know what I mean? At some point now, you're selling the wide receivers to come into a really packed and really talented wide receiver room. So, I mean, I think if he wants to come here, I think Houston and they're still willing to take another receiver. I think that's the obvious guy they'd look at. But I think they're going to have to close strong on the offensive line. I've heard, that they're bringing in a couple more guys for visits potentially, which should start this week now. So they're going to have to close with offensive linemen, regardless of if they become a starter or if they're a guy they know that can step in next year type thing, more short-term guys. And then I think in the defensive backfield, I think they'd still like to grab a corner potentially just to kind of bolster that position. They've got, again, they'll have a lot of talent. They'll have good length with the young guys they've signed in the last couple of years. But in terms of experience and guys they know they can put out there and hold their own in certain situations, that's, again, any spot along anywhere you can upgrade, they're going to need to upgrade. And so that, and then obviously defensive line is another spot. I think that they're going to continue to try to maybe land another transfer, at least one more defensive lineman. I think they'd love to get another edge, just one of those stud edges. If you can find them, there's some good ones that are out there that are in the portal. So I wouldn't be shocked to see them take an interior and out, inside and outside guy on the D line between now and then. Again, they're going to try to get as many of these guys in now so that they can do spring ball. Obviously, that's just beneficial. But once the period ends and after the 17th, when they can't get guys anymore, they'll see another close for the high school guys on February, the National Traditional Signing Day, February 1st, which has become, secondary, so to speak, for the early signing period. And then there'll still be a little close there between February and the start of summer when they'll get any guys that enter the portal after spring ball who don't see things work out their way where they're at type thing, or maybe they're just looking for a new home, whatever the case may be. There'll be another wave of guys after the spring that'll hit. They won't be around for spring ball, which you'd obviously like to have, but they'll still be out there shopping after that. So it'll probably carry all the way with the last few spots into the summer.
Well, and that's always the addition of this transfer portal thing is interesting because it'll be guys that think they're going to win a competition in their own spring balls that don't. And then suddenly it's like, where can I go win one? I think Houston moving into the Big 12 is an interesting spot for that because they'll see a bunch of American Athletic Conference talent on the roster and think, oh, I can go take a Big 12 spot. Now, I don't know if I completely agree with that, but I can see why a kid would think that, right?
Right.
My last question I have for you, and this is more the coach in me that has some interest here. We know that a lot of the groundwork in these recruits are done by positional coaches, assistant coaches, et cetera, relationships they're building with the kids. I would have said this time a year ago, and maybe even 2 years ago, that Doug Belk had like he was really great at that, right? And having, associate head coach, assistant head coach, defensive coordinator all tied to his name kind of carried some weight as he was making those relationships. Are you hearing of any assistant coaches doing a particularly great job or any guy that's like nailed a big one or two here or there, like kind of knocked it out of the park? Or is that kind of kept under wraps at this point in the process?
No, I mean, we usually can find out what coaches' areas, who's responsible for which areas and this and that. Obviously, Belk's been one of their best recruiters. He really has. I mean, this is the guy that they put in charge of programs like Shadow Creek. He's the guy that's in charge of that area, which is very fruitful down in the Pearland area. They put a ton of kids out. He covers some of Sugar Land, Fort Bend area. They put him in some key spots because, I mean, he's younger. He does a great job. He can relate very well with the guys. And he's seen as one of the best on the staff. He really is. I think Brian Early does a really good job with what he does. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he wants. He knows the pieces and, what body types and what skill sets he's looking for. He does a good job of putting, an eye on the misfit toys at times, so to speak. D'Anthony Jones, when he signed, he obviously changed his body so when he got here. But either way, the way he ended up, he just doesn't look like your prototypical edge rusher. But he was an excellent at, his skill set. He really could bend well, and he had that. Everyone got to learn and see how quick he was on that snap, how quick he was off the ball, off the jump, and so he does just a good job of finding guys that fit what he wants to do, and he makes the best of it. So I'll be interested to see. I think if he can get another either a real quality edge rusher out of the portal that kind of replaces Anthony Jones, and/or he's going to need to get some more production out of Nelson Caesar. Will be another year long next year. He should start seeing more production as well. And this comes back to the same thing. You as a coach, with better corners allows you more time to get to the pass rush. More time for the pass rush, and vice versa. With better pass rush, you don't need to hold as long on the corner. So, they feed each other, so to speak. So I think they're not far off from being competitive next year. I mean, I'm not the guy that's going to come say, hey, they're going to win the Big 12 next year. I think that would be silly. But like you mentioned, to win the same amount of games next year would be pretty impressive with the step up they'd have to go into to do it. So a lot of people are, kind of down with the down year this year, so to speak. It's tough to say down year after 8-5. A lot of people saw it as a step back, and it's tough to argue against that they didn't, underperform a bit this year. So, it's tough to say with the bodies they're still bringing in. Spring ball still to go. Guys are going to grow some. New faces are going to show up, make an impact. I think, they have the ability in this day and age to still make changes that will change your mind about how they're going to be next year. A lot of people are down this year, so they're like, we're going to struggle next year in the Big 12. I think it's worth waiting this year since we're in the time and age with the transfer portal. It's worth waiting to see who they add, get through spring ball, see what it looks like. See where it's heading and get for them in the first couple of games and see. I think they still add some more pieces that will be great.
Definitely. Rob, I'm sure you're going to be reporting on it the whole way through. We got your Twitter handle on the screen. It's at Rob_Sellers_. But where can people find you, your work, etc.?
You mentioned the Cougar corner, and that's pretty much it. Twitter.
Again, that's Rob Sellers of 247sports.com, doing all things Houston Cougars. Thank you so much for stopping by today, Rob. We always wrap up by saying go Cougs, so go Cougs, man.